Hi everybody, so this month we are focusing on trees, which is a subject I really love, and this is a top tips video. So I've been really enjoying making these top tips videos, and I think you guys have been enjoying them too and finding them helpful. So this is all my top tips for drawing trees. And when I was preparing to make this video, I was going through my sketchbooks and realised that I have drawn a lot of trees over the years, and actually a lot of trees I've actually drawn from life, which is really nice and really important. For me, the big takeaway of this video has been the importance of observation and seeing what's really there, because if I asked you to draw a tree from memory, from imagination, I think we could all do an okay-ish tree, but we'd probably do something that was very simplified and maybe very symmetrical, very perfect, something that kind of, a canopy of leaves that looks like a big cloud and a big chunky trunk coming down. And you know the kind of thing I mean. If you asked me to draw a tree very quickly, I'd probably draw something like that looks a bit like a cloud, and then it would be sort of branches like that, and it's very perfect and symmetrical and very flat and very kind of regular, and it's kind of what we think trees look like in our head, but when we actually look at them, they are so much more complex and so much more organic and natural and irregular, and they're 3D as well. Branches cross in front of each other. There's perspective, there's so much going on. So my number one piece of advice, my top tip for drawing trees, is to draw from life if you can, or draw from reference photos. And trees are a great thing to draw from life because unlike people or animals, they don't move. And I'm pretty sure we all have access to trees, whether that's in your garden, in your local park, in the countryside. I'm sure we could all find somewhere to find some trees and draw them. And I do this quite often. So these are trees in my local park. So this is a sketch with art graph. This is with watercolours, but both of these were painted from life. And then I've got some more tree studies here, and this is how I really see them. They're not finished artwork, they're just in my sketchbook, but they're just kind of tree studies, and you can see how that is very, very different to that little sketch. You can see how they're bumpy, they're irregular, they don't go straight up. We can see the branches, we don't just have a big ball of leaves at the top. And again, different trees here. So we've got these big, chunky, knobbly trunks, and then these kind of little spindly branches coming down. And then in this sketchbook, these are also drawn from life in the allotment. So looking at leaves and fruit and branches and just painting from life and just studying and looking. That's baby, not a tree. Then we've got another tree here. So I really, really recommend this. And then the nice thing is that if you spend time drawing trees from life, you kind of build up this library of tree information in your head, and you start to remember how they look, how the branches are formed, where the leaves sit, how the leaves kind of group together, how the light looks coming through the leaves, where you get the shadows, that kind of thing. And the more you draw them from life, the more your brain stores all this information. So then when you do have to draw a tree from your imagination, it looks so much more natural because you're drawing on all this experience and all this practice and all this kind of muscle memory. So then when I do have to draw a tree for an illustration project, maybe I'm doing a greetings card and I want there to be a tree in it, I'm drawing on all this past experience of drawing trees from life, and then it just makes the tree look much better and much more real and much more natural. And what I would say if you go out to draw trees from life or from reference photos is What you don't want to be doing is spending all your time looking at your sketchbook and not much time looking at the tree. You really should be spending as much time looking at the tree as your sketchbook, because this is really an exercise in observation. It's seeing what's really there. And trees are so complex. The more you look, the more you will notice. You know, and they're all so different. The trees in your area might be completely different to the trees in my area. So yeah, the more you look, the more you see, and the better your drawings will be. And this is just about sketching, so you don't need to do them in full colour. Most of my sketches are just in black and white, because I just want to do a quick kind of observational study. But drawing from life led to this big kind of breakthrough in painting trees for me, which was this piece, which was painted from my balcony in an Airbnb in Tuscany. And I wanted to paint this lovely view, and I had really limited materials with me because I was on holiday and I only had 2 brushes, and I didn't want to paint every leaf individually because that would have been bonkers, but I didn't want to have just a flat layer of colour. So instead of looking at individual leaves or looking at all the leaves as one giant mass, I started to look for different things. I looked for where are the shadows, where are the variations in tone, and I started to paint that with a very kind of painterly approach, so these kind of soft dabbing brush strokes. And because I only had 2 brushes with me, 2 little travel brushes, I had to be really creative with how I use those brushes in order to get a wide variety of brush marks to try and capture these trees. And I had this kind of breakthrough and developed this visual language for painting foliage that I use all the time and is so useful, but that came directly from painting from life and really observing what was there. So, top tip number 2 is if you want to mix things up with drawing trees, you feel like you're in a bit of a rut, you want to freshen things up, have a go sketching with a brush instead of a pencil. So instead of sketching like this, you know, maybe you've got the trunk, and then there's a branch coming out, and then there's some other branches coming out, and we've got all of these different lines, and maybe there's some bark, and that's fine. We can sketch like that. Instead of sketching like that, we could use a brush, and instead of having to have 2 lines to define the branch, we could just have one lovely expressive brush stroke to fill the whole branch. So I'm just going to show you what I mean. So I love art graph for this, but you could use anything, watercolours, ink, watered down gouache. So if we're painting a branch, and this is just great practice for handling your paint and handling your brush. So branches normally start thicker and get thinner, so we can apply more pressure at the beginning, we can get thinner, we can add more branches coming off and they can get thinner, and maybe there is another branch that's kind of coming over. And we can play with different brush strokes. So if we press harder with the brush, we get a thicker brush stroke. If we press lighter, we get a thinner brush stroke. And we can start painting branches that way. And it's nice to have a reference photo at this point so that you don't get too kind of, you go into automatic mode and then you start doing branches that look very perfect. So I've got a photo up that I'm going to use as kind of reference, and it just gets you to look at how irregular trees really are. And look at kind of where the areas of shadow are, because there's so much kind of interplay of light and dark when it comes to trees. One top tip I have is to hold your brush quite upright. It makes your lines a little bit more wobbly and more natural, and also gives you kind of a nice fine line as well. So it's a really nice meditative exercise to just zoom in on a section of a tree and just have a go sketching it with a paintbrush, just looking at what's really there, looking at how those lines look, and looking at the different effects you get, whether you're pulling the brush towards you like that. If you're pulling it away, you'll get like more of a point at the end. I wouldn't normally push the brush, but you can push it and get like a little bit more of a jagged line. And looking for things like there's a branch kind of coming behind this one. So kind of building up depth. And you can see when we're really looking at a tree, even based on compared to these sketches, it's so irregular and so unpredictable, which is really the beauty of trees. I've put the reference photo up I'm using, and I'm kind of looking at the very top left corner. So I love Artgraph for things like this, but you could also use ink or black watercolour or something like that, because you get the variation in tone. So by using our brush, we're getting all these beautiful shapes, we're getting beautiful lines, we're getting variation in tone. It's also great for things like texture. This is the one I was looking for. So with this, you can see by sketching with a paintbrush, I've got a sense of movement. You can see how the brush has travelled down the page, and it gives you these kind of lines from the bristles, which really work for lines on the tree trunk. And we get this nice contrast of light and dark. So you get a sense that this tree is real, that it's 3D, it's existing in space. And I think sometimes when we draw trees, we really flatten them, we make them look like they're squished between two panes of glass. Whereas I don't think this tree feels like this. You know, you have a sense that there's leaves in front of some of the branches, there's branches going behind other branches, that some areas are in deeper shadow, some areas are in the light. So it's more than just mapping out branches, it's looking at all these different things, it's looking at texture, it's looking at shadow, it's looking at perspective, branches moving away from us, towards us, that kind of thing. And then the next thing in this image, because it's not a bare tree, is leaves. So when it comes to leaves, you can paint leaves individually. I don't really do this very often anymore, because I think it can look a bit fussy, and also we can get kind of into automatic, I know what a tree looks like mode. So you can do, you know, little leaves like that, and it kind of looks very decorative and very stylized, but it doesn't look very real. And even if I make them a little bit more natural, it still is quite sort of bitty. I mean, it would work if it was a tree maybe at the end of autumn or kind of very beginning of spring where there's just a few leaves, then that would work. And actually I think it's great at this point just to have a little practice doing leaves. So if you want to do a little pointed leaf like that, you can do, the way I would do it is one side, then the other, and then fill it in, and you get a little pointed leaf. But it's great to practice doing leaves with a single brush stroke. So down and lift up, and then you can make your leaves look really natural and organic and irregular by just doing different brush strokes. So you can see all those lovely leaf forms I've got, and if we lift the brush up more slowly we can get quite a long leaf, which is quite nice. So I recommend kind of practicing that brush stroke. That's a really nice one. For anyone wondering what brush I'm using the ProArt size 4, which is just a really, really versatile brush. It's kind of my go-to. So we can do individual leaves like that. But my approach is to, rather than seeing all the leaves as one solid block of colour or every leaf individually, is to kind of group them together. So we're kind of seeing bundles of leaves. That's probably not the right word. Blobs of leaves, groupings of leaves, and particularly they're grouped together because they're all in physical proximity, but also there might be a group of leaves that are all in shadow, or they're all in the sunlight. So looking at things like that, and you can see the way that I've painted leaves here. It's not individual leaves, it's not, you know, there isn't a leaf that big there, and it's not a solid block of leaves either. I'm looking at where they're grouped and where the sun's hitting them, and particularly with these trees here you can see I've observed where the shadow is and where the sun is. And for creating leaves like that I would use the same brush but just use more expressive, larger brush strokes. So it could be something like just kind of dabbing like that, trying to keep my brush strokes really irregular, and then maybe there'd be a few kind of little leaves at the edge, but maybe there'd be more kind of circle. What I'm kind of really capturing more is the interplay of the leaves and the light rather than the actual shape of the physical leaves. So in this one you can see I've got these kind of dabby brush strokes, and what I'm really capturing is the light coming through the leaves. You can tell the light's coming this way, so we've got the shadows here, we've got shadows on the trunks, on the branches, and the way that the leaves are moving in the wind and the way that the light's hitting them. So just these big expressive brush strokes. So showing where the leaves are, but also where they aren't, where the light is coming through, where there's gaps. So that's really important to remember. Where is the light coming through, and where are we seeing branches as well? And when I'm painting a piece like this, I don't generally do all the branches first. I'll put the leaves in and leave gaps and then let the branches show through, and then you get more of a natural look where there's leaves or flowers on top of branches, branches on top of leaves, branches showing through, light showing through, and it doesn't feel so solid. So this is an example of what I was talking about. So I've painted these flowers really loosely. I haven't painted the individual flowers, but I've looked at different tones and shadows, and then I've left space between them. And sometimes the branches are going over the top, sometimes they're coming behind. And there's also space to see what's behind as well. So these trees are kind of made up, but I feel like they've got an irregularity to them that makes them feel believable. But back to this tree, and I'm actually quite liking this little sketch. It's got a nice quality to the line work. It's got a nice kind of natural treeness to it. So I'm going to have a look at our reference image and just have a look at the kind of the shape, not necessarily of the individual leaves, but the bunches of leaves, the groupings of leaves, looking at what shape they're making, and then also looking where the shadows are. So if I go kind of light first, and looking where they're kind of more sparse and where they're heavier, and also where the leaves behind the branches. So it's really not a case of just filling the whole thing in or doing lots of little leaves like this. I'm just looking for the shapes and the tones and working quite expressively. And then I can start putting some darker tones in where the shadows are. And varying the brush strokes, so some are just more kind of little dabs, getting a sense that there are individual leaves here, but also having these bigger areas of light and shade. So we've got the leaves on the tree there. Doing this video has made me realise how many trees I've drawn over the years, which is a lot, but it's good. It means I've got lots and lots of examples to show you. So yeah, we get shadows normally on the underside because the sun's up here, we get shadows here, but we also get shadows in darker areas where the leaves are more dense, so you've got lots of leaves overlapping, blocking the sun getting through, and then you've got less leaves, often at the edge of a bunch of leaves, and the light is shining through more. So I've kind of explored that in this piece. So again, it's not about capturing the individual leaves, it's looking at the effect of the light on the leaves with these little dabbing brush strokes. So I started with the lightest green and then put in a mid-tone and then put in the darker tone, just with these dabbing brush strokes, just trying to capture the feel of the light coming through the trees, coming directly towards us. And you get the sense of where the leaves are denser and they're blocking more of the light. Another really nice technique that I showed you recently, and I'll link to this video in the description, is this one, which is a nice way of showing a dense area of leaves, but also some individual leaves as well. And for this piece, I painted these green and yellow leaves first, and then did a very loose wash of watered down gouache over the top, and then put the branches in. And when I've put the branches in, I've deliberately left them broken, so I've left bits that are disappearing into the leaves and re-emerging again, and I think that's a really nice technique. But if you look where I've painted the leaves, they're very natural and organic, so they're not all the same shape and size. I've deliberately tried to put lots of variation in, and I find that doing the leaves with single brush strokes helps you make them more natural and give them more variation. It also speeds it up because each one is just a single brush stroke rather than each one being kind of 3 brush strokes to create a very neat pointed leaf. And it's great practice just doing leaves like that, so whatever wet materials you use, you can just have a little practice doing leaves like that. So some rounded, some more pointed, different sizes, different angles, and it's just really nice practice. And actually I just want to show you the origins of this technique, which I really like. So the origins of that are a weekly challenge we did a year and a half ago, maybe quite a while ago. So I had this lovely image, I think this might be Central Park, in the autumn, in the fall, and this kind of pathway of beautiful trees. And as I was looking at the image, I noticed that the tree trunks kind of disappeared behind the leaves and then re-emerged. So I sketched this out and I painted the leaves again using this kind of impressionistic dabbing technique, leaving areas for light to come through, looking at the different tones of the trees, looking at where it's light and dark. And then I put the branches in, kind of fitting in behind sometimes, disappearing behind the leaves and coming out again. And I really liked that technique. Obviously this is quite a rough and ready sketch. There's bits that don't work, like the I've completely lost my way with the lampposts here and the perspective, but there was things I really liked. I liked this kind of loose leaves, branches disappearing and then reappearing, and I really liked this tree trunk here, doing this tree trunk with a single brush stroke and letting the dry brush marks create the texture of the bark. So I really liked that, and then I've kind of used that and refined it so it's turned into this technique, which is much neater, more refined, and then this has just become a technique for painting trees that's incorporated into my work. So I do really love doing the weekly challenges and doing, although they're now 2 weekly, and doing our monthly live drawing sessions, because they push you to try something new and you might find a technique and then that just gets incorporated into your repertoire of techniques, which is great. So here we've got leaves with brush strokes, but there are other ways of drawing leaves as well, and it can be nice to use mixed media, and it can be fun to play around with mark making and mixed media and think about what materials could be used for drawing leaves, creating texture on bark, that kind of thing. So in this piece, which is in my children's book portfolio, I've used mixed media, so I have looked at the shape that the canopy is forming, and I've done that with really big expressive brush strokes. So I've used quite a sort of hard, bristly, I think this is the brush I used, like a sort of very bristly filbert brush, and really kind of scrubbed it into the paper a bit, which gives you these lovely brush marks here. And then when that's dry, I've gone over the top of it. So I have put in some individual leaves, and I've done that with Neocolor Pastel, so for some of these big ones here, and then also some smaller ones with pencil. And using 2 different mediums is nice because we get 2 different types of marks, so it's not making everything look too regular. So this is perfect for the bigger leaves, and this is perfect for the smaller leaves. And we're seeing this tree in perspective, so as it goes up and gets taller, the leaves are looking smaller because they're further away from us. So these are going to be the kind of the biggest leaves, and we've got the smaller leaves up here. So then it makes sense to be using something smaller. And I've layered the leaves over the top, and also kind of breaking away slightly from the form of the canopy. And I've used different tones as well, so yellow where maybe they're in the sunlight, this bluey green where they are in shadow, and also thinking about how as we go up into the canopy there's denser leaves, so then we're going to have more of these dark tones as well. So mixed media is great, and it's nice to kind of play around with whatever materials you have and have a go, you know, doing little leaves like that. Could you do individual marks? Could you do a little kind of overly squiggle? Again, I try not to get too into doing little perfect leaves like that. I try and kind of do things that are quick and loose, because it's a time saver and because it keeps things kind of loose and natural. I mean, another technique is kind of, you can do little scribbles, which can be quite nice depending on the type of tree that you're drawing. but it can be nice to play around with mixed media. So in this tree I've used the techniques that I've talked about before. So I've got these kind of loose blobby areas, we've got light at the top, dark underneath, we've got little bits kind of breaking away at the edges, but I've also used mixed media over the top and just put in a few kind of scribbly leaves, a few kind of leaves kind of breaking away where there's branches that are kind of hanging down from the rest of the tree, and also put flowers in, and it just sort of brings it all to life and we get a sense of this is what the leaves look like. We've got some of the individual leaves there. And then another one that uses a mixed media technique is this one. So we've got a very different tree, and this one I have actually chosen to paint individual leaves rather than just as a block. I think it just worked with this particular tree, the kind of amount of branches and the amount of leaves it had worked with this technique, but I've brought in a lot of variation and a lot of kind of mixed media. So I've got individual brush marks here, so just kind of little dabbing brush marks, so each leaf would be a little individual brush mark, but I've also used mixed media as well, just to kind of mix it up, so then these ones are pencil and then these ones are paint, and it just adds a little bit of variety and texture and makes it feel more natural. Because with a tree like this where you're painting the individual leaves, it's very easy to make all the leaves look the same, make them really perfect, and just go into leaf painting mode and completely forget to look at things like light and dark and also the overall shape of the tree. When I start painting trees like this, I just go out and fill everything, and I don't look at where's the light coming through, what's the overall shape of the tree, where's the light and dark. So I really have to remind myself to do that. So I have tried to bring in light and dark here, areas where it's denser, areas where it's in shadow. But I do find that harder when I'm doing individual leaves, because painting the individual leaves just kind of takes up all my attention rather than looking at the big picture and looking at the tree as a whole. Which kind of brings us on to my next tip, which is looking at the tree as a whole and looking at the shape. So I'm going to do a kind of quick study of this example tree, which is nice because it's so asymmetrical, it's so irregular. So I'm just going to do a kind of really quick study and kind of follow the line of it. With any tree, it's good to look and think, what assumptions am I making? Am I assuming that all the branches are pointing up when actually some go down? Am I assuming that all the leaves are facing the same way, or just kind of things like that? And then I'm just going to try and get the whole shape of this. And this is a really nice exercise for overcoming perfectionism. Just do a study of the whole tree and look at the shape of it, and don't break it down into individual bits too much. Just look at it as a whole, as a shape. This is ending up kind of bigger than I thought. I should have done this way smaller, but never mind. It's just an exercise. Really should be using a bigger brush than this. But kind of looking at where bits kind of break away. Shape here, these feel like they're quite triangular. These bits feel like they're kind of lifting up to the sun. And then we're seeing the branches more here on this side and less on this other side, more for those. And the branch kind of disappearing into the branches here. It needs a bit more on the trunk. But there we go, very quick, loose study of that tree. But it's a great exercise to do a kind of shape study and look at the tree as a whole. Another really nice technique if you want to loosen up a bit more. So I've talked about you know, holding your brush more upright, which gives you a finer but also more wobbly line. So that's great, changing the way you hold your brush. But another nice thing for painting trees is to use a filbert brush, so it's kind of flat like that. Really great for doing a sort of a nice chunky tree trunk, and it's great just to practice doing some lovely lines like that and get a nice texture. And then maybe so we've used that very flat to get that thick trunk, and then holding it more upright we can start to do some branches. And it gives us a different line quality because we're using the filbert brush, not the round brush, and we're having to hold it quite upright. So you're getting this kind of slight thick and thin to the line, which can be quite nice. And then the filbert's also really nice for doing big, expressive, loose areas of leaves. Especially if you do want to fill in a big area and you want to kind of, you know, fill it in like that and then maybe put some mixed media over the top. It's really nice for doing big areas. And I used a filbert brush for painting this piece, which I'm just going to have a little. So this tree and the whole piece pretty much was painted with a filbert brush, which helped get these lovely kind of branch shapes and also capturing the light in the leaves. So again, having this lighter yellowy leaves on the edge, deeper areas where the leaves are denser, and the filbert brush helped get these lovely soft brush marks and these nice kind of irregular branches. So using a filbert brush can be a great way to help you loosen up. And just looking at different types of trees, so mostly what I've shown you is the trees that are native to where I live here in England, because these are the trees that I see and the trees that I draw from life. So we've got lots of, you know, oak trees and horse chestnuts and that kind of thing. But looking at something else like palm trees, so I'm going to pop up a reference image. I feel like with palm trees it's very, very easy to do a kind of stock illustration cartoon palm tree, a bit like the tree I did at the beginning. So, you know, with no reference, if I asked you to draw a palm tree, you know, maybe we would draw kind of something like that. Or maybe we would draw kind of, you know, and it's very kind of flattened and stylized. And then it's nice when we actually look at a reference photo to go, okay, obviously all of these leaves, these fronds, aren't just pointing straight out. Some of them are falling down, some of them are arching over, some of them are pointing away from us. They're kind of flopping to the side. So really looking. So I've got a reference picture up, got a lovely palm tree, not too complicated. So first thing, looking at the stem, you know, the stem, the trunk, it's not perfect. It's got a lovely irregular kind of wiggle to it, so I'm going to do that first. And nice tip doing tree trunks is, instead of pulling your brush like this, pull it on the side and you'll get a nice wide brush stroke. And then looking at these leaves, so we've got one coming here, and then if we really look, we've got these kind of coming down, and then they're getting smaller towards the end, and then I guess just gravity, they're kind of going out like that and then coming down, but we're not seeing them sticking out here. And then this one, and we've kind of got some coming back this way actually, which is not a detail I would have thought of unless I was actually looking at an actual palm tree. So we've got another one kind of curving here. And we're seeing these ones up here at the top are more kind of spaced out, and we've only got a few sticking up, and then these ones are much denser and more regular and coming down. So it's just a great exercise in observation, and some of them overlapping like that. And then we've kind of got the top bit as well, which I've missed. And then how many have we got here? We've got 1, 2, kind of got another one, but it gets a bit messy. Let's do this one. Got some coming up here. And you can see how I'm just pulling the brush. We get a little point at the end, which is just perfect for these. Little point. And this is kind of denser and darker here. And these are going up, and then it kind of changes, and we've got more kind of going this way, coming down, kind of overlapping a bit more. Maybe these, and also reminding myself to check in and look at the overall shape. So we've got some coming up here, and then kind of overlapping here. And then putting in where there's kind of shadow and texture. And then because this is art graph, when it's dry, what I could do with an eraser is go back and put in the kind of these palm frond bits here, or I could just lift it out with a wet brush, because they are actually tonally lighter than the leaves, so I could put that little light bit in there. And this kind of texture around the top. So yeah, there is a palm tree drawn from observation. And then finally, just a little thing about colours, because I've done all of these in black and white, and I think if your motive is drawing trees and observing them, I think black and white is great, because there's so much there. You've got line, shape, tone, texture. You don't need to get bogged down in colour. But if you want to bring colour into it, you probably know what I'm going to say, which is mix your own green and browns, because you're just going to have so much more variety and it's going to look more natural. So just do some little swatches, and I would use a mixture of cool and warm primary colours. depending on the tree that you're painting. So if we go for the primary blue and the primary yellow, which both have green undertones, we are going to get a super bright green, which might work depending what you're doing, what the style is, but for me it's kind of too bright. And then we have permanent yellow deep and ultramarine, which gives you a very kind of khaki, olivey green, very warm. And I do use that for trees. It's incredibly kind of muted, but I do use it for a bit more blue in it. So that's quite nice, and that's just my personal taste, that I like these very muted colours. And then the nice thing is you can, for the shadows, you can have more blue at the bottom, and it looks quite nice. But if you want quite a balanced green, pairing one warm and one cool will give you a balanced green. So if I pair the this warm yellow, the permanent yellow, with the primary blue, we get a green that's more balanced. It's not super muted and dark, but it's not really bright either. And I can kind of play around with that, put a little bit more blue in. And then the other way round, so we can use the primary yellow, which if you're using watercolours it'll be something like lemon yellow, and then the ultramarine. And again, that gives us a green that's not quite as bright as that. It just feels a bit more natural. That kind of feels very sort of synthetic apple green, whereas that feels a little bit more natural. And this would be really nice actually if it was, the light is shining through the leaves and you want to show the light shining through the leaves. This would be quite nice. It's very fresh. And if I wanted something very bluey toned, I could use both blues. So a bit of the primary blue to bring in the greeny tones, and then the ultramarine to bring in darker tones. And then try that with the primary yellow. So we've got a kind of deep bluey green, and then if we do the same with the two blues and the different yellow, it should be more muted. Yes, it's a little bit darker and more muted, but it's a nice dark bluey green. And if you wanted a kind of minty green, you could water it down, or you could add some white to it. And then in terms of painting tree trunks, I would mix a brown with the three primary colours, and I would probably go for the warm primary colours. So I would use the permanent yellow deep, ultramarine, and flame red. And then depending how warm you want the tree trunk to be is going to affect the proportion of the colours. So if you want it a proper kind of warm brown, you want lots of red, lots of yellow, and just a little bit of the blue. And that'll get you a nice brown, nice and warm. And then if you wanted a tree trunk that was more kind of silvery and grey, you would bring in much more of the blue. So we've got a darker tree trunk there, and add a bit of water to it. So we've got a much cooler tree trunk there. And there's so much variation in tree trunks. Tree trunks do not have to be brown. You can do them sort of silvery, you can do them greeny, you can do them, I've done tree trunks purpley before. So I've just got piles and piles of stuff here. There we go. So this one, I've actually, if we look at this tree trunk on its own, it's quite purple toned, but it doesn't read as a purple tree trunk, it reads as a tree trunk. But if I'd made this a really bright kind of warm brown, I think it would have really distracted, whereas I like this kind of cool grey purpley colour with lots of Van Dyke brown and sepia in it. And we've got greeny, you know, we could go quite greeny with the tree trunk. So in this one, in this palm tree, I've gone for a lovely kind of neutral grey colour, which works really nicely, and the whole image feels very peaceful. And I've used lots of different tones in the palm tree, and I've used mixed media to kind of layer up the palm fronds, so you get a sense that it's 3D, that they're overlapping. And then also looking at where the light and dark is and putting these darker, cooler tones in where the shadow is. But yeah, this is a lovely chromatic grey. I haven't just painted a warm brown. And you look at the lovely variation in these colours, and then you compare them to, I've got 2 tubes here, and I don't know how long I've had these for. I haven't used them in a very, very long time, but we've got permanent green, middle, and burnt umber. And to me, these colours here just have so much more interest, and they're so much more subtle, and they feel so much truer to life, and you could really observe a tree and think, okay, I want light shining through, and then I want shadow, and then I want a tree in cooler tones, and then I want a warmer, muted tree. You could do so much more with these rather than using colours straight out of the tube. And the nice thing when you are painting with these and you've mixed them from the primary colours yourself, if you use them quite watery, you get a little bit of separation. So you might see when this dries, a little bit of blue might come through, and the same with the trunk colour, we might get some blue pigment and red pigment showing through, and have this nice variation in tone, which is never really going to happen with these pre-mixed ones. And obviously you can adapt to this, so with this green, you know, we can try and make it more interesting by mixing in some yellow and mixing in some brown and mixing in some blue, but then I think if you're going to go to all that effort, why not just mix the colour from scratch yourself, rather than, you know, to make this green interesting, I think I'd have to mix 3 different colours with it. So I've kind of toned it down a bit by mixing in some yellow and some blue and some brown, and I still don't think it's as nice as these ones, and that's just 2 colours mixed together. So yeah, as you can tell, I'm a big advocate for mixing your own colours and really getting to know your paint set and how your colours combine. But yeah, for me that is the secret to creating beautiful natural greens, and I know people struggle with greens sometimes and find it difficult to mix, or they don't like how it looks, but yeah, this is my top tip, is to mix them from your primary colours, so yellow and blue, and having both a warm and a cool set of yellow and blue, and play around with those. So we've got all warm, all cool, half warm, half cool, 2 blues with 1 yellow. You know, there's so much variation, and then that's really nice if you're painting lots of trees. So if you've got lots of different trees in the same image, so like in these ones we've got lots of different shades. So we've got these got more blue tones in, this is almost quite minty, this has got more yellow tones in it, this is sort of lighter, so we've got all these different shades of green, which is really nice. So yeah, that is my top tips for painting trees. So hopefully you've picked up some tips and tricks, some new ideas for approaching trees, some new techniques, and also hopefully I've inspired you to paint trees from life if possible. I do think it's very a rewarding practice, and it is my number one tip. It is the best way to get better at drawing trees, is to draw them from life. And hopefully you've also got lots of ideas for our first drawing challenge this month, which is a really beautiful, quite complex tree, but it's not about creating something that's photo accurate. It's about experimenting and playing. So you could think, okay, could I use this technique and use watercolours and light and dark to capture the branches, and maybe for the leaves I'm going to do mixed media, or maybe I'm going to do kind of loose brushstrokes for the leaves, and just think about what techniques we could bring to that piece and kind of play and experiment and capture the essence of the tree. And do not worry about getting every branch in the right place. I never do. It's impossible. You will drive yourself mad. Trees are so endlessly complicated, and it's just about capturing their essence and their spirit. And if you do find yourself getting lost, my top tip is to kind of zoom out, look at the big picture, and look at the whole shape of the tree, like this, kind of looking at the whole shape, and don't get too lost in the minutiae of getting every branch right or every leaf right.